Buy one, get one free. The cowboy who rode off with two Apache women. The sun was low and harsh over the dry land when the cowboy rode into the trading post. Dust clung to his boots, his coat, and even his eyelashes. He had been riding alone for days, following no clear plan except to keep moving west until the land or his luck changed. The trading post sat between two worlds. On one side were American settlers trying to build new lives. On the other side was Apache land, slowly shrinking under pressure and force. The air around the post always felt tense, like everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. The cowboy tied his horse to a worn wooden rail and stepped inside. The building smelled of leather, sweat, coffee, and old wood. A few men stood around a counter, talking in low voices. They stopped when he entered. Strangers were never fully welcome here. Too many lies, fights, and broken promises had passed through this place. He asked for water first, then food, then supplies. His voice was calm, and he didn't try to sound tough or clever. The shop owner watched him closely, noticing how the man spoke with care instead of swagger. When talk turned to trading horses, the mood tightened. Horses were valuable, and trust was rare. Outside, two Apache women stood near the shade of the building. They were sisters, though most people did not know that. They had been raised together, survived together, and lost together. Not long ago, soldiers had forced their family to leave their land. Their camp had been broken apart and relatives scattered. Since then, the sisters had stayed close, refusing to be separated again. They had come to the trading post to exchange woven goods and herbs for basic supplies. Many people ignored them or spoke over them. Some looked at them with suspicion. Others looked at them with curiosity that felt heavy and unwanted. The sisters were used to this, but they had learned to stand straight and quiet, letting people reveal themselves first. One of the men inside laughed loudly during the horse discussion. The cowboy, tired and dry from the road, made a careless joke. He said something about how trading always seemed like someone wanted more than they gave. The joke landed wrong. The room went silent for a moment, then filled with awkward laughter. Someone muttered a phrase meant to be funny but sharp enough to cut. It was the kind of joke people repeated later without thinking. The cowboy realized his mistake right away. He didn't laugh again. He raised his hand slightly and said he meant no offense. His voice stayed even. He didn't blame anyone else. The tension slowly eased, though the nickname born in that moment would live longer than anyone expected. Outside, the sisters had heard the laughter through the thin walls. They exchanged a look. One of them noticed how the cowboy later stepped outside, rubbing the back of his neck, his eyes down. He didn't puff his chest or act proud. He looked embarrassed, maybe even tired of himself. When the sisters finished their trade, the cowboy stood nearby, giving them space. He nodded politely. One of the sisters nodded back. It was a small thing, but small things mattered. As the afternoon passed, a wind picked up, carrying sand and heat. The trading post slowly emptied. The cowboy refilled his water and checked his horse. The sisters waited too, resting in the shade. They spoke quietly to each other in their language, discussing where to go next. Their path was never simple. Every direction carried risk. A sudden argument broke out between two men near the post. Angry words flew, sharp and careless. The sisters stiffened. They had seen how quickly anger could turn dangerous. The cowboy stepped back, clearly not wanting trouble. When one man shoved another, the cowboy spoke up, not loud, but firm. He suggested they cool off, reminded them everyone was tired and hot. The argument faded. One man spat on the ground and walked away. The other followed. Silence returned. One of the sisters looked at the cowboy again. She saw how he did not try to impress anyone afterward. He simply returned to his horse. The second sister noticed too. They had learned to read people by their actions, not their words. Later, as the sun dipped lower, the shop owner asked the cowboy where he planned to sleep. He shrugged and said, "Probably under the stars." There were no rooms left, and he didn't complain. The sisters overheard this. They knew the land nearby well. They also knew the dangers that came out after dark. When the cowboy walked toward the edge of the post, one sister called out to him. Her voice was calm but clear. He turned, surprised. She spoke in careful English, telling him there was a safer place not far away where travelers sometimes rested. She did not offer it as a gift or a command, just information. He listened closely, nodding. He thanked her, meaning it. He asked if she and her sister were traveling far. The question was simple, without hidden meaning. The sisters answered honestly, saying they were looking for a place where they could stay together and work without being forced apart again. The words hung in the air. The cowboy did not respond right away. He could hear the weight behind them. He did not make promises. He only said he hoped they found such a place. As evening came, the three of them found themselves walking in the same direction. Not planned, just natural. They talked more, not about big dreams or bold plans, but about weather, roads, and the way the land had changed. The cowboy spoke of moving from job to job, never staying long. The sisters spoke of their people, their customs, and the pain of being pushed aside. There was no romance in the air, no grand moment, just understanding, slow and careful. The cowboy did not act like a hero. The sisters did not act helpless. They were simply three people sharing a stretch of road and a quiet fire as night fell. By the time the stars filled the sky, something unspoken had formed. Not a deal. Not a joke. Not a bargain. Just a sense that their paths might cross again, and that this crossing was not an accident. Far away, stories would later twist this moment into something cheap and simple. But the truth was quieter. It began with tired people, cautious words, and the rare feeling of being seen without judgment. The next morning the sun rose slowly, painting the desert in soft gold and orange. The cowboy woke first, the air still cool compared to the day before. He had slept near a small grove of mesquite trees, using his coat as a blanket. His horse grazed nearby, calm and patient, knowing its rider would mount again soon. The sisters had slept a short distance away, their blankets neatly folded, their movements careful and quiet. They were both early risers, accustomed to the discipline that life on the move demanded. The first words of the day were soft. The cowboy didn't shout or demand anything. He simply greeted the sisters and asked if they had rested well. One of them nodded, the other smiled faintly, and together they packed their small belongings. There was no rush, only the gentle rhythm of preparation. Even in the silence, there was understanding between them. Words were not always needed. They began walking along a dry riverbed, the cowboy leading his horse by the reins. The sisters walked beside him, keeping their pace steady. He noticed the way they moved, careful but purposeful. Their eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert for dangers he might not even notice. He had ridden through many towns and settlements, seen many people, and faced threats of bandits or wild animals, yet he had never met anyone like these women. They carried strength quietly, without boasting or complaint. As the morning grew hotter, they found shade beneath a rocky outcrop. The sisters shared some bread and dried fruit they had saved. offering pieces to the cowboy. He accepted politely, careful not to take more than needed. Conversation was slow at first. They spoke about the land, about where they had been, and about where they were going. The sisters were careful with their words, choosing what to share and what to keep private. They spoke of places they remembered from childhood, of rivers where they had fished, of hills where they had played. The cowboy listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to impress, didn't make jokes to lighten the mood. He simply listened. At one point, the younger sister asked the cowboy why he traveled alone. His answer was simple. He had no one waiting for him, no home to return to. He had been riding from town to town, working odd jobs, trading horses, and sometimes carrying supplies for settlers who could pay him. There were no grand plans in his words, no promises of greatness, only the honesty of a man moving through life one day at a time. The sisters nodded, understanding without judgment. They too had been forced to leave their home, to travel without certainty, and they recognized the quiet truth in his words. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the land grew hotter and more difficult to traverse. The sisters guided the cowboy to a small spring they had discovered on a previous journey. It was hidden from the main trail, protected by a thicket of bushes and rocks. The water was cool and clear, a small blessing in the harsh desert. The cowboy dismounted and washed his face, the water refreshing him more than he expected. The sisters took their turns, careful to keep the water clean. They had learned long ago that survival depended on respect for resources and attention to small details. As they rested, they began to talk more about their family. They spoke of the relatives they had lost, of the forced relocations, of the moments of fear and confusion that had followed. Their voices carried sadness, but not bitterness. They told these stories as a way of remembering, of keeping their family alive in memory. The cowboy listened, and though he did not fully understand the depth of their loss, he felt its weight. He realized that their courage was not loud or flashy. It was steady and enduring. By midday, they resumed their journey. The path ahead was uncertain. They had no clear map, only knowledge of landmarks and past experiences. The sisters were careful, watching for signs of danger, tracks in the sand, the smell of smoke from a distant fire, the shadows of birds circling in the sky. The cowboy began to trust their instincts, realizing that while he had experience traveling alone, these women knew the land in ways he never could. They were guides, teachers, and companions all at once. As the afternoon wore on, the sisters spoke of the importance of staying together. They had already been separated from their family once, and they did not want it to happen again. They explained how, in their culture, family was not just blood but trust and loyalty. They had learned that survival depended on unity, on knowing that the people beside you would never abandon you in danger. The cowboy nodded, understanding the truth of their words. He did not speak of his own family. There was no need. The silence between them became a quiet bond, unspoken but real. Suddenly, the path narrowed as they approached a canyon. The walls rose steeply, casting long shadows over the ground. The sisters paused, examining the route ahead. There were loose rocks and sharp turns, and the cowboy realized that a wrong step could send someone tumbling. The sisters took the lead, guiding him and his horse carefully through the tricky terrain. They moved with confidence, showing no fear. The cowboy followed their lead, grateful for their guidance. In moments like these, he realized that this journey was not about who was stronger or braver. It was about trust and cooperation. As they reached the end of the canyon, they found a small clearing. Wildflowers grew in patches, and a few birds sang in the branches of a lone tree. It was a rare spot of peace, in a harsh and unforgiving land. They stopped to rest, and the cowboy took a moment to watch the sisters. He noticed the way they laughed quietly at small things, the way they looked out for each other, the way they carried their history without letting it weigh them down completely. He realized that this journey was already changing him. The sisters, meanwhile, spoke of their dreams, not grand or impossible dreams, but simple ones. They wanted a place where they could live together, work, and remain free from being forced apart. They wanted to carry on their traditions while learning new skills that could help them survive in the changing world. They spoke with hope, not despair. The cowboy listened, understanding that these hopes were not naive. They were survival strategies, carefully measured and realistic. As the day moved toward evening, the wind picked up. Dust swirled around them and the sky turned a deep orange. The cowboy suggested they find a place to camp for the night. The sisters agreed, leading him to a small, natural shelter beneath some rocks. It was not perfect, but it was safe and hidden from the main trail. They built a small fire, careful not to draw attention. The cowboy helped, moving quietly and efficiently, earning the sisters' respect. Around the fire, they shared food again. The sisters had brought dried corn and beans, and the cowboy shared some salted meat he had carried. Conversation was light but meaningful. They spoke of the weather, the animals they had seen, the changes in the land. Occasionally, they laughed quietly at small mishaps from the day. The laughter was soft but genuine, a welcome relief from the tension of the journey. As night fell, the stars filled the sky. The cowboy looked up, thinking of the vastness of the land and how small he felt. The sisters lay down nearby, resting but still alert, their eyes occasionally scanning the shadows. There was no fear, only awareness. The cowboy realized that he was learning from them, how to move quietly, how to observe carefully, how to survive without relying on brute strength alone. Before sleep took them fully, the younger sister spoke softly. She asked the cowboy if he would continue with them, if he would travel further. He hesitated, aware of the risks. They were not offering a promise or a demand, only a chance to stay together on the path ahead. He considered it carefully. Something in the calm determination of the sisters, in their clear understanding of what mattered, drew him to say yes. Not out of obligation, not out of romance, but out of respect and trust. That night, as they slept beneath the stars, the three of them were no longer simply strangers sharing a path. They were companions, cautiously aligned in purpose, each bringing something essential to the group. The cowboy had his experience and resilience. The sisters had knowledge of the land and the strength of unity. Together they formed a fragile but real alliance, built not on jokes or deals, but on mutual understanding. And though no one outside this quiet clearing would understand it, the seeds of trust and cooperation had been planted. By morning, their journey would continue, carrying them through challenges yet unseen, shaping them in ways that neither the cowboy nor the sisters could have predicted. Each step forward was a choice, each decision a test of courage, patience, and respect for one another. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the desert. The cowboy stretched, his muscles stiff from the long ride the day before. His horse nickered softly, eager to move, and the sisters were already awake, quietly preparing their small camp. Their movements were careful, precise, and unhurried, showing the discipline they had learned from years of traveling and surviving in difficult conditions. There was a calm energy in the air, a quiet understanding that this day would bring challenges, and that every decision mattered. They began their journey early, moving along a narrow path that led through rolling hills. The cowboy walked beside his horse, holding the reins loosely, while the sisters walked alongside, scanning the land with sharp, practiced eyes. Every footprint in the dust, every broken twig, every shadow was meaningful. The cowboy had learned to rely on instincts in his travels, but he quickly realized that the sisters' knowledge of the land was deeper than anything he had experienced. They could tell which paths were safe, which areas might hide danger, and even which plants were edible if food became scarce. The morning was quiet except for the occasional rustle of birds and the soft clatter of hooves on stone. The sisters spoke in low tones, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape that could help them find water or shelter. The cowboy listened carefully, asking questions when necessary, but never interrupting or pretending to know more than he did. He respected their authority, recognizing that their experience and understanding were vital to the success of their journey. As they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley, the sisters paused. The younger one crouched down, inspecting the ground carefully. "Tracks," she said softly. "Travelers. Maybe 2 or 3 days ago. Horses, some supplies, but nothing dangerous." She studied the marks for a moment longer, then looked up at the cowboy. "We should be fine if we stay off the main path." The cowboy nodded. He had faced threats before: bandits, wild animals, sudden storms. But there was something different about traveling with the sisters. Danger was no longer just about physical survival. It was also about understanding people, respecting customs, and moving with caution in unfamiliar territory. He realized that this journey was teaching him patience, awareness, and humility. As though anyone got into a dream, by midday, the sun was high and harsh. The heat radiated off the ground, and the wind carried dust in sharp, stinging gusts. The sisters led the cowboy to a small ravine where a hidden stream flowed. The water was cool and clear, a rare blessing in such a dry land. They drank slowly, savoring each sip, and the cowboy washed his face and hands. He noticed the careful way the sisters treated the water, making sure it stayed clean and usable for everyone. It was a lesson in respect and caution, and he silently thanked them for it. After a brief rest, they continued along the valley floor. The cowboy noticed how the sisters moved naturally through the land, stepping lightly on rocks and avoiding loose sand. They were cautious but not afraid, aware of their surroundings without letting fear control them. He followed their lead, learning to trust their judgment. For the first time, he felt the comfort of moving not as a lone traveler, but as part of a small, capable group. As afternoon approached, clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming, sudden and fierce, common in this part of the desert. The sisters quickly discussed a plan. They spotted a small overhang in the rocks nearby that could serve as shelter from rain and wind. They guided the cowboy there, moving quickly but carefully to avoid injury. The storm hit shortly after they arrived, with rain beating down on the rocks and wind whipping dust and sand in every direction. Inside the shelter, the three of them huddled together, listening to the storm. The cowboy was amazed at how calmly the sisters handled the situation. They had weathered many storms in their lives, and their experience showed. One sister unrolled a blanket to keep them dry, while the other checked their horse, making sure it was safe and calm. The cowboy realized that survival in this land was not about brute strength alone. It was about awareness, planning, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. When the storm finally passed, the land smelled fresh and clean. The sky cleared, leaving behind a brilliant blue canvas above the desert. The sisters smiled, relieved that their careful planning had worked. The cowboy smiled too, appreciating the lesson in preparation and resilience. They set out again, moving along a narrow canyon path that twisted and turned through the rocky terrain. The canyon was beautiful, but dangerous. The walls rose high on either side, and loose stones threatened to fall at any moment. The sisters led the way, pointing out safe spots to step and warning of loose rocks. The cowboy followed closely, learning to trust their guidance completely. Each step required attention and care. There was no room for carelessness here. As evening approached, they found a small clearing with a few bushes and flat rocks. It was not ideal, but it was safe for the night. They gathered firewood carefully, choosing dry branches and twigs while leaving the surrounding environment mostly undisturbed. The cowboy helped, feeling a growing sense of respect for the sisters and their knowledge of the land. Once the fire was lit, they cooked a simple meal of dried corn and meat. The sisters shared stories of their childhood, of places they had lived, and of lessons learned from their family. They spoke with humor and warmth, showing that even in difficult lives, moments of joy and laughter could exist. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that their stories were not just entertainment, they were lessons, guiding principles and reminders of resilience. After the meal, they sat quietly around the fire. The cowboy looked at the sisters and noticed how they supported each other in small, meaningful ways. One would adjust a blanket, the other would offer water, and each would speak softly to encourage the other when the night grew cold or uncertain. It was a silent display of trust and cooperation that spoke louder than any words. Night fell, and the desert sky filled with stars. The cowboy lay down near the fire, thinking about the day's journey and the lessons he had learned. He realized that traveling with the sisters was more than just companionship. It was education, challenge, and growth. He had learned humility, patience, and the value of trust. He had learned to observe, to plan, and to respect others' knowledge and experience. Before sleep took them fully, the older sister spoke softly, asking if the cowboy would continue traveling with them. The question was simple, but it carried weight. She was not asking out of obligation or curiosity, but out of necessity and care. The cowboy considered it carefully. He knew the journey ahead would be difficult, filled with unknown dangers and challenges. Yet something about their courage, wisdom, and determination drew him to say yes. That night, under the wide desert sky, they slept in silence but with a quiet bond forming between them. The cowboy had become more than a lone traveler. The sisters had become more than companions. They were guides, teachers, and friends. Together they faced the challenges of the land, learning from each other, protecting each other, and growing stronger in ways that none of them could have predicted alone. The journey continued, each step forward a test of endurance, patience, and respect. The cowboy felt a sense of belonging he had not known before. The sisters felt the quiet comfort of knowing that, for this part of the journey, they would not be alone. And though the road ahead was uncertain, each of them knew that together they could face whatever the desert and the world might throw at them. The next morning, the air was cool and dry, and the desert seemed calm and still. The cowboy rose first, stretching his stiff muscles from the day before. The sisters were awake soon after, moving quietly and efficiently. Their routine was practiced, almost ritualistic, shaped by years of travel and survival. They packed their small belongings, carefully stowing away food, blankets, and water. There was no hurry, only a steady rhythm, a sense of purpose that kept them moving together. The path ahead was uncertain. The sisters led the cowboy along a winding trail that climbed gently toward a ridge. From the top, the land stretched far in every direction, a mixture of valleys, rocky outcrops, and dry riverbeds. The cowboy paused to take in the view, realizing how vast and unforgiving this world could be. Yet there was beauty here too, subtle and quiet, and the colors of the rocks, the patterns of the clouds, and the distant shimmer of sunlight on sand. They traveled in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The sisters were focused on the trail, scanning the horizon for danger or signs of water. The cowboy followed closely, learning to move with caution, to watch for subtle changes in the land that might indicate risk. The desert could be cruel, and he knew that one careless step could change everything. Yet the company of the sisters made the journey feel less lonely. Their presence brought a sense of balance, a quiet reassurance that he had not felt in years. By midday, the sun had climbed high, heating the land and forcing them to seek shade. The sisters found a small grove of mesquite trees, a rare oasis in the dry expanse. They rested there, sharing food and water carefully, making sure not to waste anything. The cowboy marveled at their resourcefulness. They could make even the harshest landscape manageable, turning obstacles into lessons and challenges into opportunities. As they ate, the sisters spoke more about their lives. They told stories of their family, their culture, and the challenges they had faced. They spoke not with bitterness, but with honesty and resilience. The cowboy listened, realizing that their experiences were shaping not only their journey, but also his understanding of the world. He began to see things differently: the importance of caution, the value of preparation, and the strength that came from relying on knowledge rather than brute force. Suddenly, movement in the distance caught their attention. A small group of men appeared on the ridge ahead, riding fast and shouting. The cowboy instinctively reached for his horse, ready to react, but the sisters held up their hands. "Wait," one whispered. "Do not show fear." The men slowed as they approached, their faces unfamiliar. One of them, older than the others, called out a warning. They were travelers too, seeking information about nearby settlements. The sisters exchanged a glance, quickly assessing the situation. They decided to speak carefully, offering simple answers without revealing too much. The cowboy stayed quiet, observing how the sisters handled the encounter. He realized again how much their wisdom mattered in keeping them safe. Once the men rode away, the trio continued along the trail. The encounter left them tense, but it also strengthened their bond. The cowboy saw clearly that the sisters' caution was not fear, it was strategy. They understood the world in ways he had never considered, and he trusted them more than ever. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain grew more challenging. The trail narrowed, and rocky cliffs loomed on either side. Loose stones shifted underfoot, making each step dangerous. The sisters led the way, pointing out safe spots and warning of hazards. The cowboy followed closely, aware that even a single misstep could lead to injury. His horse moved cautiously, responding to his careful guidance, but also learning from the sisters' example. They came across a narrow stream, small but clear. The sisters guided the horse across first, then helped the cowboy navigate the slippery stones. The water was a welcome relief, and they drank deeply, careful not to waste a drop. The cowboy marveled at the sisters' ability to make even a simple crossing safe and manageable. Every step, every decision was deliberate and thoughtful, reflecting their experience and intelligence. By late afternoon, the sky darkened as storm clouds gathered again. The sisters recognized the signs immediately: wind patterns, changes in temperature, and the smell of rain in the dry air. They found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, securing their belongings and preparing for the storm. The cowboy helped where he could, moving with increasing confidence under their guidance. He realized that survival in this land required more than strength. It required observation, knowledge, and patience. The storm hit hard, with rain pounding the rocks and wind whipping dust and debris around them. Inside the shelter, the trio huddled close, sharing blankets and water. The cowboy was impressed by how calmly the sisters handled the situation. They worked together seamlessly, checking their horse, adjusting coverings, and keeping the fire safe. Their unity and coordination turned what could have been a dangerous night into a lesson in cooperation and resilience. When the storm finally passed, the land was refreshed and quiet. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the rocks and sand. The sisters smiled, relieved, and the cowboy felt a deep sense of admiration for them. They had taught him so much about navigating the desert, about trust, and about the strength found in careful preparation. As evening approached, they continued along a ridge that overlooked a distant settlement. The sisters stopped, examining the area carefully. "People there may not understand our journey," one said softly. "We must be cautious. Do not draw attention." The cowboy nodded. Aha! He realized that what awaited them would be different from the dangers of the wild. In town, people judged quickly, often misunderstood what they did not know, and sometimes acted out of fear or prejudice. He understood that their next challenge would not be the land, but the judgment of others. When they reached the edge of the settlement, rumors had already begun to spread. People whispered about the cowboy traveling with two Apache women. Some laughed, some shook their heads in disbelief. The nickname "Buy One, Get One Free" began to surface, carried by curiosity and misunderstanding. The sisters walked with quiet dignity, aware of the gossip but choosing to ignore it. They knew their journey was about survival and unity, not the opinions of strangers. Local authorities, hearing the rumors, questioned the trio. They demanded explanations, suspicious of the women's presence and the cowboys' intentions. Religious leaders approached as well, questioning the morality of the situation. The cowboy spoke calmly, explaining the journey without exaggeration or pride. The sisters added their own words, honest and measured. They clarified their reasons for traveling together, emphasizing their need to stay united and safe. Despite their explanations, judgment hung in the air. Some people still saw them as a scandal, twisting their story into something crude or sensational. The trio realized that the outside world rarely understood the truth, and that rumors could be as dangerous as storms or wild animals. They remained calm, relying on each other for strength. That night they camped on the outskirts of the settlement, hidden from most eyes. Around a small fire they shared a quiet meal and reflected on the day. The cowboy admired the sisters' courage, their intelligence, and their resilience. The sisters appreciated the cowboy's respect, his willingness to learn, and his quiet strength. Together they had faced not only the challenges of the desert, but also the judgments of others, and had emerged stronger. As stars filled the sky, the trio spoke softly of the journey ahead. They knew it would not be easy. They would face more dangers, more misunderstandings, and more obstacles. Yet they also knew that together they had the knowledge, skill, and trust needed to continue. Each step forward would require careful thought, patience, and cooperation. Before sleep took them, the younger sister spoke quietly. "We may not be safe yet," she said, "but as long as we stay together, we can face anything." The cowboy nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He realized that this journey was no longer just about moving through the land. It was about loyalty, trust, and shared strength. That night they slept under the stars, side by side, but aware of the dangers still ahead. The storm of the day had passed, but the storm of public opinion and misunderstanding lingered. They had survived the desert, but the next challenge would test their courage and unity in new ways. And as the fire died down, they felt a quiet determination. No matter what others thought or said, they would protect each other and continue forward together. The journey had changed them all. The cowboy had learned patience, humility, and the value of listening. The sisters had shown courage, leadership, and wisdom in navigating both land and people. Together, they were more than travelers. They were a team, united by circumstance, choice, and a shared determination to survive and thrive despite the odds. The morning air was crisp and calm as the trio prepared to leave the outskirts of the settlement. The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in pale gold and soft orange, giving the land a quiet, almost magical glow. The cowboy stretched his stiff muscles and checked his horse, feeling the familiar rhythm of preparation that had become part of their daily life. The sisters moved with practiced care, folding their blankets, securing their belongings, and making sure their supplies were in order. Each action was purposeful, reflecting the lessons they had learned from traveling together. They set off along a narrow trail leading away from the town, careful to stay out of sight of the curious or suspicious eyes that might follow them. The cowboy walked beside his horse, letting the sisters take the lead. He had grown to trust their instincts completely. Their ability to read the land, the weather, and the signs of human activity was unmatched. Each step forward was deliberate, measured, and guided by experience. The sisters spoke quietly, planning the next part of their journey. They discussed routes that would lead them to water and shelter, avoiding areas that might attract attention or conflict. The cowboy listened closely, asking questions when necessary, but mostly observing and learning. Over the weeks of travel, he had come to admire not just their knowledge of the land, but their wisdom, patience, and courage. They had survived challenges that most people could not imagine, and they had done so without losing their dignity, their humor, or their sense of hope. As they walked through a rocky valley, the sisters shared memories of their family. They spoke of relatives they had lost, of times when they had been separated, and of moments of joy that had carried them through hardship. The cowboy listened silently, absorbing each story. He realized that these stories were more than just memories. They were lessons in resilience, unity, and survival. The sisters had learned to navigate not only the land, but also the challenges of a world that often misunderstood them. Their courage and determination were a quiet strength that inspired him deeply. By midday, the sun was high and the desert heat intense. They paused at a small oasis, a hidden pool of water shaded by a few trees. The cowboy drank deeply, grateful for the cool water, and the sisters carefully washed their faces and hands. As they rested, the conversation turned to the future. The sisters spoke of their dreams, not grand or impossible, but simple and meaningful. A place where they could live together safely, continue their traditions, and have the freedom to make choices without fear of being separated. The cowboy considered their words carefully. He had traveled alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it meant to be part of a small, supportive group. The sisters had taught him lessons in patience, trust, and humility. They had shown him that strength was not measured by how far one could ride or how fast one could act, but by the ability to observe, listen, and protect those who mattered. He felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain became more challenging. Rocky cliffs, narrow paths, and dry riverbeds tested their endurance and skill. The sisters led the way, pointing out safe steps and warning of hidden dangers. The cowboy followed closely, aware that even a single misstep could result in injury. He moved carefully, trusting their guidance and learning from their example. Each obstacle they overcame together strengthened their bond and built confidence in their shared journey. In the distance, they could see the faint outline of another small settlement. It was farther than they had expected, but the sisters had studied the land carefully and knew a safe path. The cowboy felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Towns always brought new challenges: judgment, misunderstanding, and scrutiny. but they also offered opportunities for rest, trade, and connection. He trusted that the sisters' guidance would keep them safe, just as it always had. As they approached the settlement, rumors began to spread. People whispered about the cowboy traveling with two Apache women. Some laughed, some frowned, and some stared openly. The nickname "Buy One, Get One Free" circulated, a cruel distortion of the truth. But the sisters walked with quiet dignity, ignoring the gossip and focusing on their purpose. They understood that their journey was not about public opinion. It was about survival, unity, and making choices for themselves. Local authorities and settlers approached, questioning them. They wanted to know why the sisters were traveling together with the cowboy, and rumors added suspicion to their curiosity. The cowboy spoke calmly and honestly, explaining the journey without exaggeration or boasting. The sisters added their own voices, clear and measured, emphasizing the need to stay together and protect one another. Despite their explanations, many still misunderstood, judging quickly without hearing the full story. The trio realized that public perception could be as challenging as any physical obstacle. The desert had tested them, the storms had tested them, and the difficult terrain had tested them. But navigating the judgment of others was an entirely different trial. They had to remain strong, patient, and united. Their trust in each other became their shield against misunderstanding and prejudice. That evening, they found a quiet place on the outskirts of the settlement to rest. A small clearing shielded by rocks and bushes offered privacy and safety. They built a fire and shared a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and water. Conversation was gentle and reflective. The cowboy spoke of what he had learned during the journey, the value of listening, patience, and relying on others. The sisters reflected on their own experiences, noting how their resilience and unity had guided them through challenges. As darkness fell, the stars filled the sky. The trio sat quietly, watching the vast expanse above. The cowboy felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling he had not known in years of wandering alone. The sisters felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that they had remained together, protected each other, and continued to move forward despite the obstacles. They realized that the journey had changed them all, shaping their understanding of strength, trust, and loyalty. The younger sister spoke softly, breaking the silence. "We have faced many challenges," she said, "but we are still together. That is what matters most." The cowboy nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that the journey had been about more than survival. It had been about connection, respect, and learning to trust in others. The older sister added, "Stories will be told about us, but they may not be true. People will twist the truth, as they always do. But we know what happened. We know our choices and our courage. That is what matters." The cowboy agreed. He understood that their truth was theirs alone, shaped by experience and loyalty rather than rumor or legend. The night was calm, the desert silent except for the occasional sound of distant animals. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light on their faces. They felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The journey had been difficult, filled with storms, danger, and misunderstanding. Yet they had remained united, learned from one another, and grown stronger through the experience. Before sleep, the cowboy reflected on the lessons of the journey. He had learned humility, patience, and the importance of trust. He had learned that strength was not measured by speed or force, but by the ability to observe, listen, and act wisely. He had learned that companionship and unity could provide safety and courage in ways that solitude never could. The sisters, too, reflected on what they had learned. They had navigated the desert, faced judgment, and maintained their bond despite the challenges. They had shown courage, leadership, and wisdom in every step. They had demonstrated that even in a world that often misunderstood them, it was possible to make choices that preserved dignity, safety, and freedom. As the fire died down and sleep overtook them, the trio felt a quiet satisfaction. Their journey was not yet over, but they had reached a point of reflection and understanding. They knew that rumors and misunderstandings would continue, but they also knew that their choices and unity were more important than the opinions of others. The next morning they would continue on their path, guided by experience, trust, and mutual respect. They would face more challenges, but they were no longer strangers. They had become companions, teachers, and learners, bound by a journey that had shaped them in ways they could never have predicted. And though history might remember them differently, the truth of their journey, of courage, resilience, and unity, remained with them. The cowboy would carry the lessons of trust and humility. The sisters would carry the lessons of wisdom and survival. Together, they had proven that strength was found not in isolation or legend, but in understanding, respect, and the choice to protect one another. In the end, the desert had tested them, but it had also taught them. The storms had challenged them, but they had endured. The judgments of others had pressed upon them, but they had remained steadfast. And as they moved forward into the vast horizon, each step was a testament to the bond they had forged, a bond of trust, courage, and shared determination that no rumor or legend could ever erase. Their journey would continue, but the lessons of this chapter, the strength of unity, the power of respect, and the importance of courage, would guide them forever. The cowboy and the two sisters had faced the desert, the world, and themselves, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before.